my presentation is there. Mandate of the Ministry of Industrialisation and Trade. I think most of you, when you see presentations, we always give a little bit of an address of who we are. So I'm going to mention a little bit about what the mandate of the ministry is. And then, of course, the obvious, what is the AfCFTA, why the AfCFTA, how is it implemented, how has Namibia's participation been, and then the Women and Youth Protocol, in Women and Youth in Trade Protocol, and then what's next. I'll be very brief because I think I'm also part of the panel for the next one, so I don't want to be one that delays everything, especially the interactions and the Q&A that we're going to be having after the panel. Right, so the mandate of our ministry. I think all of us know that the executive, through the ministries, are responsible for creating a legislative and regulatory framework. So we are there to ensure that policies, strategies, laws, regulations are in place. And that's our mandate there, is to improve the ease of doing business for anybody that would like to do business in the country, because we know that business ultimately is what drives the economic engine. To attract investment, to increase trade, both domestic and international, and then develop and expand the country's industrial base. Of course, the industrial base would be the foundation, because if you don't have an industrial base, it's difficult for you to do everything else at the top of that pyramid. So I'm one of those people who like, did you know? Yes, so did you know that Africa's size, that's actually the size of Africa, that's 30 million square kilometers. And when the way the world and the globe is presented, you know, when you see it at BBC or NBC or whatever, it doesn't give you the real magnitude and depth and dimension of the size of our continent. It's huge, all right? So there, Russia, which is like, okay, it's a country, it's not a continent. That's how big it is, and how many times it fits in Africa. You have the United States, that's how many times it fits. It will fit several times, I think maybe another 2 times. China, which is the second most populous country, Brazil, Europe, and then India. Of course, we know that India is not the most populous country. So that's the size of Africa and all of us that are in there. 10 countries in Africa have a population less than 10 million. So you can see the prospects and the growth that Africa still presents, and the fact that I think Alan mentioned that when you walk out there in Africa, 8 in 10 of us are youth. So you can see the prospects for growth and expansion of our continent. And then again, did you know that import and export procedures involve an average 20 to 30 different parts, 40 documents, 200 data elements. Why is this fact important? It's important because it tells you the complexity of doing business. And then, of course, women and youth in trade, I think we mentioned, you heard when the ministers and other speakers before me that talked about the hurdles and the barriers. This is one of those hurdles and one of those barriers. High transport costs are 63% higher than in developed countries and 135% higher than in Europe. Again, what's the implications? Consumables and goods are more expensive for us. That's what it translates into. Because that transport has to be accounted for, and where does it come from? It comes from the consumer price. If you are lucky, you might get it subsidized by your state, but I know that we don't have pockets that deep. And then the average cost of freight, of course, we know that most of our consumables come from outside, and those are the quantities, and that's how much it costs. So really, really expensive for us to get our products inside the continent and for them to eventually reach the consumer. So why do I have these diginomals? Because I think this is the rationale of why we want to have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How do we improve business? How do we create a market? How do we remove barriers to trade? All right, so here it is. What is the AfCFTA? Like one of the previous speakers, I also speak very fast, and when I get excited about my subject, which, as you can see, I can speak a little bit faster, but luckily you can follow with the reading. So it's the largest free trade area since the creation of the World Trade Organization. I think World Trade Organization has, 164 member states, and we are at 55 countries. With that size population, and then that combined GDP. But that combined GDP, dear colleagues, countrymen, compatriots, is not even India's, or is not even China's, and it's not even the Russians. Yeah, it's a very small fraction, and you can see what the prospects look like. Should we actually implement this agreement and gain from those expectations? So the key tools, what are the tools that we use? We use tariff reduction on most tradable goods. So I have to explain to you what a tariff reduction is. So when goods are traded, there's usually, you pay VAT. I know all of you guys, most of you are entrepreneurs. But one of the biggest barriers is that there's usually a tariff, which is a trade tool. So one of the things that we want to do is to remove the tariffs, okay? So that it becomes a little bit easier. When there's a tariff, it means that the product, again, when it reaches you, the consumer, it has that added tariff as part of the cost. So what we're trying to do with the AfCFTA is to remove 90% on all the products that we're trading within the continent. We want to reduce 90% of the products, we want to zero rate the tariffs. So that's a big deal, okay? But we also know that that's not the only thing that makes trade move. We want to liberalize trading services. So did you know, again, that most of the cost of a product is actually not the trading good, it's actually the trading services. I always like to give the example of the iPhone and the Android. I'm not discriminating, which is 69% of the value of the iPhone is not the product, it's the services. And what we think is probably the most expensive service for the iPhone? The IP, the intellectual property, the R&D, the research, the transfers, because they're made like somewhere in Korea, the same factory as the Androids, guys. Don't get carried away, okay? And for them to get transported, the financial services involved, the logistics, that's all services. So we know that if we accompany our trade liberalization, the tariffs and the services, we will get better trade. Then there's also something very clear in trade, it's called the rules of origin. So it's my favorite. My very first exercise when I got to do trade was doing rules of origin. So that's why I have a passion for it, but it's also one of the most intricate. So the rules of origin tells you what's the economic origin of a product. Okay? I always give an example, infamously, of our Windhoek lager, for obvious reasons. So Windhoek lager, what do you have from Windhoek lager? You've got the beer itself. And what makes that beer liquid? It's the malt and the hops. Where are they produced? Where? We import them from many places, all right? The bottle, where does the bottle come from? Somewhere, okay? And where does the top, what is it called? Yeah, where does that come from? And then the packaging, the label, where does that come from? So you understand that just that beer there is very complex. Now, what are the rules of origin? Where is the economic origin of that beer? And what we do in trade, we come up with rules where we determine what that origin would be. And what we do, we actually negotiate what that rule would be. So we have different types of rules. You have something called wholly obtained, that's my favorite. So we export beef and fish, right? So wholly obtained means it's wholly obtained from the ground of Namibia, the sea of Namibia, the air of Namibia, the factories of Namibia, everything comes from Namibia. It becomes very complicated when you get a beer and when you get manufactured and more complex products. iPhone will even be more complex, a car will even be equally complex. So these rules, we actually negotiate what those rules are. Why are these important? The rules determine where the jobs are actually made. The rules actually determine where the value is derived. Okay, so I can buy a plain jacket or just a plain thing from Germany, and then I just put a brand here, Ndiitah something. Where are the jobs and where is the value? Is it here where I just put a brand, or is it where the jacket? You have people in factories, and so rules of origin are very, very important. And in this agreement, we're very, very deliberate to ensure that the rules of origin are going to support African jobs and employment, African value addition, and manufacturing. and that the value remains in Africa, and that it actually assists us Africans. All right. And then identification of non-tariff barriers. This is very, very complicated. In fact, non-tariff barriers are those things that we've talked about. Most of the things that the protocols are actually trying to advance. So, for example, the food safety standards, customs procedures, technical barriers to trade, what do they call packaging instructions. So these are things that are there, and also another one is infrastructure. I think it was mentioned by one of our speakers earlier about how it's just difficult to move from A to B. How do you get my products to Congo? And those barriers, can we remove them? Okay. And then ultimately the aim is to create one African market. Okay. That's why we're doing all of these things for all of us. All right, so how did it happen? Everybody remembers what happened in 1963? Okay, you don't remember because we're not there, but some people actually remember. Right. So we know history tells us that was the year that the Organization of African Unity was formed. And that was where the aspirations of our forefathers that crafted where we actually are today. It's because of what happened on that day in Addis Ababa that we are here today, and we can look and survey. In the background, you can see how much ground we have covered. So the AfCFTA has its origins from all of these engagements that were deliberate. It didn't just happen from one day to the next. It took a lot of time and effort. And I can only imagine what's going to happen when we are here, old people. What are we going to be looking back, and what would we have done? Because our forefathers did this for us. So what are we going to do for our generations to come? And I think that's a very interesting discussion that we should be having and really being forward-looking about. So ultimately, the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was signed on that day. I think it was signed in Kigali, right? Yeah, actually it was 2019, and it was on the 21st of March. I know that our president could not attend because it was our Independence Day. Right? So that is the evolution of how far we have gone, but ultimately it's in the treaty of the Africa that we want, the Agenda 63. This is all part of these negotiations and all these instruments and institutions that Africa is trying to put in place for herself. The objectives are there. I think everybody has mentioned them today. We want to create a single market for goods, services, facilitated by movement of persons in order to deepen the economic integration with the African continent, and in accordance with the Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa, enshrined in Agenda 2063. So that's the overall objective. This is what we want. If you don't aspire, it's not going to come to fruition. And then I think I will just not bother you more. Yeah. This is when you write the small things, it's when you don't want the people to pay attention. But you can continue reading what those are. The last one there, resolve the challenges of multiple and overlapping memberships and expedite the regional and continental integration processes. I think one of the things we heard earlier on, the speakers from the UN delegation talked about integration and how it's at the heart of everything that Europe does. Because in our integration is where we'll find our strengths, okay? Because we leverage on economies of scale, harmonization, and it's easier to move between one place to the next. So, did you know? Yeah, look at that. So, those are all regional, sub-regional trade agreements or agreements on our continent. Okay. I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with this. Okay, there's no problem with overlapping memberships. Agreements. I always look at the body, how, say, for example, when I run, right? I think some of you know that I run. Your muscular system, your endocrine system, your respiratory, your cardiovascular, they're all working together. So hopefully these ones, based on how they were formed and what was the basis, these are all regional integration agendas that we have, which is very encouraging because we know that we always wanted to integrate. So I think the only one that I thought maybe, did you know, again, was that one, YM. So it's the francophones that are in ECOWAS, and they actually have an integrated currency and CMA, Common Monetary Area. And so just imagine, so these building blocks that you have, The AfCFTA, the idea is that we actually try to harmonize all of these different building blocks. Other trade agreements or REPs, regional trade agreements, have already advanced, and there's a lot we can learn from them. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, etc. So, for example, we are the oldest customs union, and there is a lot there that we can share with others on how a customs union operates. EAC are pretty advanced in cross-border trade. SADC, we've done very, very well with political stability. Okay, I can continue. You can help me during the... Right. Okay, IGAD, and then you have the COMESA, very big COMESA. COMESA is a common market, and of course there are very greater levels of integration. I always like looking at one country. Which country do you think has the most common denominator? Can you find one that belongs in the most regional integrations? Can you find one? Which one?
Mauritius.
Yeah, well, which other one? Mauritius is there. Comoros? Yeah, also looks like it's in a lot. Okay, yes. So you can imagine that they don't have greater capabilities to negotiate in the AfCFTA, but one of the aims is to see how do we harmonize this overlapping membership in these regional trade agreements, because remember, each one of those has its own rules. And so imagine I am a Namibian manufacturer of cosmetic products, and I want to export to one of those countries. I'll have to ensure that I meet all the rules of origin, all the tariff barriers, whatever they may be, of each and every one of them. So you understand the rationale why we want to do this. All right. And what are the tools used? Because I think you've seen it, the what, why, how, right? So progressive elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trading goods, and then of course progressive liberalization in trading services. I'll touch on that one a little bit in the next slides. Cooperation and investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, customs matters, trade facilitation, and trade-related areas. I don't want to bore you with all the technicalities, but this is what we actually do for a living. Establish a mechanism for dispute settlement, settlement of disputes concerning their rights and obligations. This is a really important one. It's very different from many of the other agreements that are on the continent. Because what happens with other agreements on the continent, if there's a dispute, it ends up being discussed diplomatically. You know, the heads of state have a closed tete-a-tete, and they say, please, that thing, we should remove it. Huh? But here, we actually have a dispute settlement mechanism whereby there's actually a tribunal of arbitrators that will go and look at the agreement and see who is right or who is wrong, and if needs to compensate, things like that. So really rules-based, that's what we're looking at here. More than solidarity and brotherly and sisterly rule, but yes, we want it to be fair and transparent for every trader, and they need to know that it's there for you. When you are trading, you know that there is recourse to this. And then, of course, institutional frameworks to implement the administration of the AfCFTA. I'm not going to get into that, but I hope that one of my colleagues from the Secretariat might later on. So what are the expectations? These are the expectations that we're hoping. And I think the previous speakers have all mentioned that they will only remain a promise and an aspiration to the degree to which we actually do something about it. Okay? And who's we? We is the member states and the domestic policies, tools that we put in place to actually harness on this AfCFTA. So we want to create a bigger and integrated regional market for the reasons we've all mentioned before, permitting producers to benefit from economies of scale and to access cheaper raw materials and intermediate inputs. So of course Namibia is a classic one for this one. Yeah? This one is important for us as Namibia. Why? We're a population of 2.7 million after the census next year. And if you have an investor to recoup their capex, they'll need a bigger market. Okay, so for Namibia, when an investor comes to Namibia, the NIPTD will tell you that we are not just coming to this 2.7 million, but to have the entire Africa. So that is one of the benefits, especially for the smaller countries, to attract that economies of scale. Improving conditions for forming regional value chains and integration into global value chains. You heard the minister, she was very, very articulate into that. I'm not going to mention, especially the cosmetics area. How can we all get involved in regional value chains? She went ahead and even mentioned the ones that we have in South. Giving consumer access to cheaper imports from other African countries. Ultimately, that's what we want to do. Better allocation of resources and faster economic and trade growth, catalyzing the structural transformation. This one is really, really important, dear colleagues, countrymen. We, as a continent, is endowed with these natural resources, right? But guess what? Namibia doesn't export diamonds to Botswana, to Nigeria or to Mauritius. Where do they go? They go elsewhere. So we need to be able to find a way in which we can harness technology so that we can then start adding value, so that those consumables actually are manufactured here. Very, very important. Right? Encouraging both intra-African and external direct capital outflows to African countries. So again, an investor from America will be like, when they come and invest in Africa, they know that they have this secure market, bigger than just one country. Stimulating cooperation in other areas such as technology transfer always comes without saying, innovation, investment, and continent-wide infrastructure development. Very, very important. I think one of the dreams we want to have is probably have these trains that come across the continent, you know, north to south, east to west. What would it take to have those types of infrastructure? Have I passed my 20 minutes? I think I have. Status of negotiations and implementation. I think you can read for yourselves there. I will not be very long, but basically, we had two phases to the negotiations. The first one is technically done, which is the trading goods, trading services, and then the dispute settlement. Now we are in the second phase, which is what I will then mention next. Negotiations and negotiations, they don't really end. Can I tell you that SADC, you know, SADC was formed in 1980, right? We still didn't finalize negotiating rules of origin for, is it wheat and textiles? Yes. Yeah. After all these years, 40 years, we've not finished negotiations. It's the nature of negotiations, the give and take. So we have some of those issues that are outstanding, but we've made very, very good progress on rules of origin. Remember, we said that we're going to 90% of our products, we will remove all the duties. Then there's that 10% which can either be sensitive or excluded. Now, I have to make it very clear because we've gotten a lot of questions, especially from the media, to say, how do we ensure that the products from Gabon do not flood the Namibian market? It's because in the offer, in the schedule of tariff concessions, we have there a exclusion or a sensitive list whereby we try to say that those products that we feel we cannot afford to have competition in them for strategic reasons such as employment, etc. But of course, this is all still within the rules. So very, very important that we have that. And that the agreement also makes provisions for when there is an influx of products from another country, the safeguard measures that are in an agreement and in any trade agreement that we then have to employ. The onus is on us to make sure that we have the institutional framework to be able to conduct such. Okay. The rules of origin, you can see there 87.8. So how many is left? 2.2. But I think maybe the Secretariat might have an updated number, hopefully. We have some issues that are still outstanding. It is on rules of origin on textiles, rules of origin on automotives, rules of origin on, what's the other one? Those two. So those are the ones that are mostly outstanding. Asra is my colleague who's the technical negotiator on the AfCFTA. So that's why he knows everything from us, memory. All right, and then let me go on. Trading services. So trading services, in the olden days, we used to say, if you're above 45 and you've not heard about trading services, it will be very difficult for you. But we know that in today's world, it's one of those things that we need to do. Namibia is also slowly developing our capabilities to address and negotiate trading services, as well as trading in trading services. So the continent, as I've mentioned, the trading services was in the first phase, and we've done fairly well. 46 countries, I'm assuming the number might be updated by the colleagues from the Secretariat, have submitted their offers. The good news with services is that you are very flexible in what you, how you table your offer. I'm not going to get into the details. If you want to get the details, you can come to my office, and my colleague Davlin will be able to assist you with more details on that. And but we do have priority sectors. It's those ones: business services, communications, financial services, tourism, and transportation. For obvious reasons, they help to accelerate the regional integration of the continent. And then those details are not necessary. Yes, I know you're probably wondering, when are we going to have a picture there, tourism? Does anybody recognize that place? It's somewhere in Namibia. So we hope that the citizens of Africa will actually be able to, will all be able to visit each other's countries. I know that the average of you guys here, including myself, when you get a chance to go and travel, where do you usually want to go? Dubai, London, New York, Paris, yeah, Lisboa. Yes, it has to change. I think the onus is on us to change it for the next generation, that we have the trading services protocol on tourism is liberalized, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to Libreville, I want to go to Ouagadougou, I want to go to Nairobi, you know, that's what we should, that's the mindset we have to change. Because the average European wants to go to Paris, Rome, Milan, Zurich. They don't want to come to Windhoek and Gaborone. Right? So we do need to change that mindset, and a lot of it depends on us. Phase 2, I'm going to be very brief. Women and youth in trade, the topic of discussion today. Digital trade, we'll discuss it tomorrow. Investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights. These protocols were developed and adopted by Summit and Council earlier on in the year. Women in youth in trade, I think the representative from the AfCFTA Secretariat, she really went into great details about why that protocol and why women and why youth. But there, I think those are just a few statistics. Africa has the highest entrepreneurship rate in the world, a great opportunity again for us to seize. And then entrepreneurs in Africa are younger, with a median age of that, 31, than in other developing regions. So you can imagine what this would look like in 10 years. Okay. Entrepreneurship has proven fruitful for providing employment. I think most of us are able to testify to that. And then the AfCFTA can generate opportunities for youth entrepreneurs in the continent through the access to much larger market and creation of conducive business environment. Right? I know you're probably thinking that, when is this thing going to happen? It needs to start somewhere. If we don't make these deliberate actions now, they will not happen. And if we do it in 10 years, we're delaying ourselves for another 25 years. The Women and Youth in Trade Protocol, I borrowed this from the Secretariat. I think there 80% of businesses in Africa are categorized as small and medium enterprises. 85% of the informal sector accounts for more than 85% of the economic activity in Africa. So you can also see why it's important that this protocol is there for women and youth, because it is us that are in that category. And then that's the age defined by youth, but I think it should go a little bit down, guys. 35 is old. I think some people have like 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds already at 25. And then of course women account for nearly 90%. Women account for nearly 90% of the labor force in the informal sector. Really, really important. I think colleagues should recall when we had COVID and we had to lock down. Remember when we had to lock down everything, the markets, and it was really hectic. It was within a week, we realized that the informal markets had to open up because mothers were not able to buy food for their children. So this is really, really crucial, and of course then we look at ourselves and assess to say what means and what measures can be put in place to ensure that this is more formalized and more structurally based. I'm about to end. Trade of Namibia, trade as a percentage of Namibia. So I'm talking about Namibia. Why Namibia and why are we in this AfCFTA? So Namibia is a very open country for trade. Okay? In other words, the percentage of trade as a measure of GDP for Namibia is very, very high. Very obvious reasons, right? Besides our fish, our grapes, our uranium, everything else comes into the country from other parts of the world. Okay? I have some statistics there. So we're a net importer of goods and services. That's what we are. Okay? And that has implications on our jobs as Namibians. Right? We have a trade deficit that widened in the last month, year to year, but in the previous month, it had actually shrunk a little bit, which shows there is some stimulation of growth taking place. And then here, I think very important, Namibia's exports are dominated by raw materials and intermediate goods. And then, however, capital and consumer goods are a large part of the import basket. And those consumables, friends, consumables are everything. This book is a consumable, this phone is a consumable, this jacket is a consumable. Yeah, so you can see that if you have to look at your capital outflow, I always say, give this example to yourself. As you are standing here, what is made in Africa? I don't have to the GDP. That's a rhetorical question, really. The consumables. What is made in Africa from the consumables? I think it's